A German chancellor is supposed to represent our values when dealing with other countries. We have to work with these countries and therefore make compromises. So, how does one manage to do these things? Good to have you with us on Asia Talk in Beijing in the Artists' Quarter 798. How much understanding does one have to show for countries such as China and Russia without backing down from one's own position? That's the question we'll be looking at today. How much consideration does one have to show for these development dictators, these partners whom many dislike, but with whom one has to get along somehow? This is no easy task, as the Frankfurt Book Show showed this fall, when China was the featured country. A man who has both a clear and controversial position on this subject is our former federal chancellor. A very warm welcome here in Beijing, Gerhard Schröder. Mr. Schröder, do you understand China?
I hope I understand a little of the country. But to really understand China, you need to speak the language, and I don't. And you really need to live here longer and see and experience the different parts of the country, which I haven't had time to do.
You argue that one should talk to China as an equal, but it's a country that isn't as highly developed as Germany. Is this the right approach?
It certainly is. China is too significant, economically, politically, and culturally, not to treat it as an equal. And that applies to us in Germany and the Americans as well. And the significance of the country is set to grow rather than dwindle, as we all know.
Isn't this over-hasty submission to some extent?
No, it has nothing to do with submission. It's about rationality, and it's about interests, but mainly it's about reason.
So, in other words, it's more sensible to meet the country halfway rather than lay down clear rules for negotiations.
There's no contradiction in meeting the country halfway and having clear rules. Each actually serves the other. But what I'm missing from time to time, also in Germany and in German journalism, is a willingness to take a sober look at the difficulties in building up a country like this. One has to realize that reform and liberalization policies have actually freed 400 million people from starvation and bitter poverty. And the changes in China over the past 10 years have primarily resulted in developments that would have been thought of as completely out of the question 20, 30, not to mention 50 years ago. So what I'm calling for is greater application of the country's cultural, economic, and political background, as well as its own particular course of development.
But the positives can be offset with the things that are still not functioning here. People are still locked up for their political beliefs, despite China's achievements in other areas.
One should observe the achievements, one should honor and recognize them, and then lobby for changes to the other things you mentioned. They'll change gradually, not overnight. Above all, they won't change if one only defines the country by its failings, something that occurs in Germany from time to time. This means you're more likely to come up against hardened positions instead of a willingness to talk openly about problems that without doubt should be addressed.
Is it sometimes the case that as Chancellor one might relent for economic reasons and say we have to sell to China and we have to supply the Chinese market and therefore we can't say what we think on all counts?
I think there's nothing dishonorable about bearing economic interests in mind. As a chancellor or responsible politician, quite the opposite, in fact. An export-oriented economy such as Germany's needs markets to survive. And markets are opened up by winning confidence, of course. To that extent, the economy has always been a major concern of mine, and still is to this day. And I can't think of anything negative to say about that.
Does one have to show consideration?
Yes, now and again, no question.
And not be able to say what one would really like to say?
Well, that's another overinterpretation, although you're well within your rights to say it. No, one can say what should be said, but one must ensure that the exchange takes place in an atmosphere of trust.
These days, your work is more focused on the business side. You travel to China to do business. What are you doing here exactly?
I don't do any business directly. I help businesses go about their work. But otherwise, I'm very often out in the provinces and pursuing diverse interests. For example, we're currently preparing a large-scale conference on sustainable development and new energies, and I want to help out with that. Are
you doing this for a company?
No, I'm doing it in cooperation with the Institute for Foreign Relations, which is located here, and which invites former heads of state and government. I'm doing it in cooperation with the institutions that are here, because energy policy interests me. I really do it out of interest, and not with any concrete aim. I advise companies, as you know, a media concern in Switzerland, an investment bank in Paris and London, the Rothschild Bank. Of course, I'm involved in events for them. That's part of my area of responsibility.
Paris und London. Die Rothschild Bank, und für die mache ich natürlich auch Veranstaltungen, gar keine Frage. Das gehört zu meiner
What can you do to help in China? What kind of form does this support take?
By opening up dialogue possibilities, I think.
What does that mean?
It means that there are dialogue partners who are interested in the same things.
Die sich für die gleichen Dinge interessieren.
In companies, but also on the political side. I mean, it's no secret that the really important issues in China are decided politically.
You opted relatively quickly to go into business after your term of office. It was a move that met with some criticism in Germany.
Yes, it's strange. I didn't stop voluntarily. I always say I didn't lose an election, but rather I only just failed to win it. And if that's the case, and you still feel young, and you're actually still young enough to do something sensible, quite frankly, you need work if you don't want to fall into a deep hole after doing a job like that. I've had two dream jobs in my life. On the one hand, the political work I was able to do, and on the other, I enjoyed being a lawyer. I've gone back to that profession. I also give lectures all over the world. It fills my time, and I need it so as not to stagnate at home, although I love to be at home with my family now more than ever before. Not that they would like me to be at home all the time.
You regularly travel to another country and know your way around it quite well now, and that's Russia. How would you compare China and Russia?
The scale of their problems is similar, even if their approaches are different. To that extent, when you talk about the scale of the problems, on the one hand, you're talking about the whole issue of sustainable production, which both countries need. The restructuring of industry, which is necessary in both countries too. There are also certain shortcomings common to both countries. In spite of their different cultural backgrounds, it's all interlinked. But the cultural differences are there. Russia today is a country that feels like part of Europe.
Do you feel closer to Russia for that reason?
I wouldn't put it quite like that. I do feel close to the country, no doubt about it. It's also easier to understand Russia because the cultural background is easier for us to appreciate, of course. They are, as I said, European, and that simplifies understanding, of course.
Although we're here in Beijing, I'm very curious to ask a question concerning Russia. You once said Putin was a Democrat through and through. Now, every child knows that's not the case. What did you mean when you said that?
I was answering a question from one of your colleagues. I was classifying a person, not a social condition. And I wouldn't change anything about my classification of the person, Vladimir Putin.
I understand. What about the Chinese government?
I don't know it well enough to be able to judge. The mistake was to allow myself to be drawn into a discussion about individuals. I was chancellor at the time, and one shouldn't do that sort of thing. But mistakes are there to be made. I repeat, the description of the person was not a mistake.
And one can separate things in this way?
No, and again, one has to separate things this way.
Would you like to have a closer relationship with the Chinese leadership? You enjoy close links with the Russian government.
I can't really complain about perceptions after my time in office either. In that respect, it's fine as it is. During my period in office, we tried to pursue a course that I think worked quite well, namely, focus entirely on a continual dialogue between differing experiences, or on the basis of differing experiences. Then we called it a dialogue of constitutional states. It's about educating lawyers and other professionals.
But does that really work? You've exposed yourself to the accusation that it's actually just a fig leaf. One stages a conference here and another one there.
No, this is not about conferences. It's about a continuous conversation, about the education of judges and people in the administration. It's about eliminating shortcomings. It's about concrete aid, which then, of course, affects changes, and should affect changes. They're aware of that here, but it also has to do with mutual respect.
But nevertheless, you did some things differently. You didn't receive the Dalai Lama when you were chancellor. Why not? Are you not interested in him?
No, not that much, I have to be honest. I can't really understand the way he operates. I'm a northern German Protestant. And as such, one has different ways of trying to find meaning beyond what one knows and what one considers to be right.
Außerhalb dessen, was man selber kennt und für richtig hält, zu Sinnstiftungen zu kommen.
But the fact is that the Tibetans are a repressed people and cannot live the way they want. Wouldn't it make sense to support their freedom?
Religious freedom is something that finds universal support no matter where. The question is not so much whether one supports religious freedom or not, but rather how does one do this as a responsible politician? It's an issue that always comes up in discussions with our opposite numbers. But if you want to win trust, then there has to be some reassurance that it won't result in some sort of stunt. Otherwise, you won't achieve anything.
You once said that when one comes back from China, one returns to Germany a changed person. What has changed you during your travels through China?
Well, the fact that there are 1.3 billion people living here. The sheer size of the country. The enormous task involved in giving these billion people a perspective. That's something that is unparalleled in history. And how this has, in many respects, actually already been achieved is something that is all too rarely acknowledged in the public consciousness, which is just not fair to the country. For example, just take a look at the training drive in the engineering and public administration sectors. And giving all these people reasonable prospects in life is a huge job. As someone who is also familiar with China, you know how big the social differences still are between the West on the one hand and the highly developed East on the other. So you'll be well aware of the dimensions of this task at hand here.
But isn't all this making Germans feel insecure too? All these newly qualified engineers on the jobs market, and suddenly all the cars that used to be manufactured in Germany are being made in China.
The problem is not that we should be ready to refuse others the right to prosperity that we have fought for and won for ourselves. That's out of the question. You mentioned cars. It's not that we can demand that the Chinese revise their desire to own a car, but we have to change the cars themselves if it's going to work out, and if we don't want to have environmental problems. Incidentally, this is an issue that needs to be addressed. Since the 17th Party Congress, 2 discussions have been conducted with real vehemence and affected the country. One is social, in particular about migrant workers. The other is about sustainability as an integral aspect of industrial production.
Is the leadership really serious, or is it just toying with the idea?
No, I think it's serious. Whenever I'm in China, I try not just to stay in Shanghai or Beijing. I also try to visit smaller cities. Let's take one like Suzhou, with a population of almost 10 million like Bavaria. It's a mining city, and the locals are working with people from the Ruhr region, from Bochum in particular, on a major recultivation project. They're really trying to implement, and soon one will be tempted to say, green policies. But we're not quite at that point yet. That's clear. But I think that sustainability is being introduced into production processes.
But isn't the damage done every day more than just a drop in the ocean?
Yes, perhaps there are still droplets. But the important thing is that the country's leaders have recognized that future production will only make economic sense if resources are used sensibly. If that happens, which we've also had to learn. We never really discussed protecting the environment back in the 1950s or 60s. The first person to do that, by the way, was a social democrat, Willy Brandt, who talked about the blue skies over the Ruhr.
Chain smoking.
Whatever. You need to understand that the first thing they said here was, we've got to feed the people and give them job prospects. The way that was achieved involved exploiting the environment and also destroying the environment. Now they've realized that the whole thing only makes economic sense if they look after their resources.
China an eco-dictator?
No, I wouldn't go that far. I think what's being done here now, the way China presents itself on the international stage, they've grasped that it is not in their own interests to produce against nature. Anyone who's lived here for a long time should support that. That's the case with you, too. You've certainly seen some dramatic developments in the 15 years you've been living here, also ones for the good.
Auf jeden Fall. Auf der anderen Seite,
but why is so little written about it?
I suppose because on the other hand there are still these senseless imprisonments where people are stopped from writing something which ultimately wasn't so important. So you wonder why the leadership does it, why it's so petty and short-sighted on this issue.
Warum macht die Führung das? Warum ist sie so kleinlich und auch so kurzsichtig in diesen Fragen?
This somewhat superficial view of things said about China may be one reason.
How does one bring the leaders round? What can we do to get as many of our values, of which we are convinced, established in China?
In the first place, it's not about coming here and walking around pointing. As a German, I also have reservations, because it wasn't so long ago that we had to learn democracy too, and needed outside help to do so.
But now we've got it right, haven't we?
Now we've got it right, and we'll never forget it again. That's what I expect, and I really hope I'm right. And that's all the more reason to stop pointing the finger at others, and to make sure that in the talks one has, in social discourse, that change happens. But it's only possible if one stops concealing the positive aspects of development.
But isn't it sometimes better to be firm so one can set boundaries?
The problem with firmness is, how is it going to look? I've always had good experiences with discussions which are clear, but which dispense with spectacular actions, rituals above all.
At the start of your chancellorship, you made an unusual gesture towards China. When the Chinese embassy in Belgrade was bombed, you went there. That was a trip which was planned in any case, but you apologized to China.
I thought it was necessary. It shows common respect, firstly for the suffering of the victims, and secondly for the people in China. I wasn't sent there by NATO. I went there and apologized myself without any instructions from NATO. I don't know whether they noticed in Brussels. If they did, they didn't say anything, which was fine, because it revived the possibility of a dialogue.
Why did you do that? Was it intuition?
It was more that it had to be that way. You see, they didn't do it to us. It was the other way around, even if it was a mistake. However, as a politician, and therefore someone who was indirectly responsible, I had to take the first step, and I didn't have the slightest problem with that.
That was in 1999. After that, the relationship between you and the Chinese leaders was different. It created a bit of trust. Is that right?
The most important thing of all is to have a basis of trust. On this basis, one can also discuss controversial issues. And so I did it, but not for the sake of public opinion in Germany, but for the thing itself.
China also exploits its economic power to gain political influence.
Don't we?
Yes, but at the moment we're doing it rather less skillfully than the Chinese.
You can't blame the Chinese for that.
Yes, but couldn't the balance of power easily tilt faster than we would like because of that? Because America makes more mistakes than expected and China is more skillful.
I think America is making relatively few mistakes at the present. That was different in the last 8 years. But I think the existence of a new American president alone is enough to change the country's image. Thank God, I might add. No, of course, everyone tries to seize an opportunity to advance their specific interests. And I say again, neither Europe nor Germany is interested in having weak partners, neither in a weak Russia nor a weak China. Only strong partners are self-confident. And self-confident partners understand how to balance interests, and that nobody can dominate others, which is why everyone in international politics has always said multilateralism is the principle of international cooperation and not unilateralism.
But if you think through the rules we ourselves devised, one man, one vote, then we as Europeans probably have about as much to say in the world as the FDP used to have in the German parliament.
Okay, that's a bad example. I almost said it really has changed, but I hope not much, or for long. On the other hand, one thing is clear. Europe will only be able to operate as the political equal of the United States on the one side and of Asia with a strong China on the other if we manage to combine Western Europe's technology, knowledge, and experience with that of Russia. That is the task we have. Otherwise, it won't work. Russia sees itself as a European country. We in the European Union would do well to respond to that.
Putin now appears to be so disappointed that he's increasingly turning towards China.
I can't judge that because I don't know. I don't just believe that Russia has an Asian outlook. You can't miss it. But in as far as I know, top people in Russia, they are primarily European in their outlook. And the Union is doing good by taking advantage of that, by entering into partnership with Russia in all areas, economic, political, and cultural.
We have implied that Europe has a tendency not to speak with one voice. The Chinese could exploit that. Is it one of Europe's big weaknesses?
As far as foreign and security policy is concerned, it is without doubt still a weakness. But variety can also mean strength, especially cultural strength. Insofar, I don't think Europe needs to hide. Integration has to go ahead, no question. We need a joint foreign policy. Maybe we'll create that on the basis of the Lisbon Treaty. But above all, we need the strategic partnership with Russia that I've been talking about, so Europe can operate in the triad the way I want it to.
The Chinese don't like it when Russia and Europe join forces.
Everyone should realize that the other has interests and keep that in mind. I don't believe one can accuse the Chinese leaders of lacking pragmatism.
Don't we in Germany tend to underestimate this sort of change in the balance of power, this rising China, or even close our eyes to it?
We tend to have slightly one-sided discussions about the country, to define it exclusively in terms of its shortcomings, which exist in society. That's not enough. It's also not enough to deal with China according to our own interests.
You have praised China a lot in this talk. What annoys you about it?
The things that still aren't right. I really hope that an intelligent approach to the country will do away with the shortcomings.
Many thanks, Mr. Schröder. It was nice to have you here. And please don't forget what the Chinese say. Man Sao. Go slowly.